Last night, we told you how the CIA has been sending drones into Mexico to snoop on drug cartels. Today, the Trump administration has designated the Mexican drug cartels terrorist groups. You heard that right. In a move that raises fears in the region of cross-border American military intervention, such as drone strikes, the Trump administration has declared that 8 Latin American organized crime groups are terrorist organizations, and this puts pressure on Mexico's government and raises the prospect of U.S. military intervention in the region to dismantle them. But just how powerful are these cartels really, and where are they located exactly? 6 of the groups on the list are based in Mexico, including its 2 largest drug trafficking outfits, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. The other 2 are Venezuela's Tren de Aragua and El Salvador's Mara Salvatrucha, also known as MS-13. Now, have a look at this map now. It shows where these notorious cartels are located exactly. And for more than a decade now, the drug cartels have been fragmenting, creating a host of smaller splinter groups that fight over turf. And today, the 2 largest and most powerful cartels are the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. In 2024, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration called Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels transnational criminal organizations. They are involved in arms trafficking, money laundering, migrant smuggling, sex trafficking, bribery, extortion, and a host of other crimes reportedly. According to one estimate, in fact, from the U.S. military, the cartels control more territory than ever before, about a third of the country. The Sinaloa Cartel is Mexico's oldest criminal group, dating to the 1970s. And one of their most lucrative businesses in recent years has been the production of the synthetic opioid fentanyl, the drug behind tens of thousands of overdose deaths each year in the United States. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel is a hyper-violent and fast-growing group that spread through sort of franchise agreements with local gangs, and they have aggressively attacked Mexican authorities, including military helicopters, using explosive dropping drones and IEDs. What would the designation mean is the immediate question. You see, when a group is designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S., it becomes illegal for people in the U.S. to knowingly offer support. Its members are also banned from entering the U.S. If they are already in the U.S., they face being deported. If financial institutions discover they have funds connected to the group, they are required to block the money and alert the U.S. Treasury Department. Analysts say that the designation could affect the supply of weapons to the cartels from the U.S. Earlier this year, a U.S. government study traced more than 150,000 firearms, including assault rifles, back from Mexican criminals to gun shops and factories in the U.S. under anti-terror laws. Those who purchased the guns in the U.S. for the cartels could face much heavier penalties. So how has Mexico reacted, you might be wondering? As far as Mexico is concerned, the decision of the U.S. government to designate the cartels as terrorists comes as no surprise.
On one hand, it's good what Trump will do. On the other, it's not good that Mexicans allow him to do it. We should address it from home. Another thing is that if somebody wants to take drugs, it's their life, but we can't let these cartels boss us around us, because as Mexicans, they're trampling us, and many of us allow them to do so.
U.S. President Donald Trump has promised to wage a war on drug cartels, particularly over their role in supplying the deadly opioid fentanyl, which is a leading cause of death among young people in the U.S. In fact, he has accused the Mexican government of intolerable alliance with these groups. Mexico's government has previously rejected this characterization and has instead blamed America for providing the groups with high-caliber weapons and for failing to investigate money laundering from drug sales on American soil. It has also long pushed back against the inclusion of drug cartels on the foreign terrorist organization list, alongside groups like the Islamic State and Hezbollah. Mexico says that drug cartels require different solutions. But in recent years, the drug cartels have deepened their territorial control in Mexico, keeping murders and disappearances near record highs. Washington's move to brand them as terror organization comes as Mexico is engaged in tense discussions with the Trump administration over security and migration to try to avoid a 25% tariff on most of its exports. And on Wednesday, Mexican president there said that the CIA drone flights over Mexican territory were part of a collaboration with the U.S. government.
If they make this decree to investigate even more the money laundering in the United States and their own criminal groups that work in the United States that make this sale of drugs, that's great. What we do not accept is the violation of our sovereignty. So that is why it is collaboration, coordination, without subordination, without interventionism, without meddling.
The decision comes amid growing reports of greater use of American drones over Mexico to snoop on cartels and sniff out drug labs. But experts say that this also raises the possibility of American drone strikes on Mexican territory. Our next story is about the age-old debate over freedom of speech. The frontman of British rock band Placebo, Brian Molko, has reportedly been charged with defamation. Why is that? He reportedly called the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni a fascist and a Nazi during a gig in the country back in 2023. On Monday, Italy's Justice Ministry approved a request reportedly from prosecutors to charge Molko, a 52-year-old Scottish-American musician, over comments that he made about the Italian Prime Minister during a concert. Molko had allegedly called Meloni fascist, racist, as well as Nazi while being on stage at the concert, which, by the way, drew about 5,000 people to the venue. The band's lead singer had first attracted trouble when footage of him making anti-Meloni remarks appeared online almost 2 years back, even though he asked his fans not to record reportedly. In August 2023, Meloni herself had sued Molko over the comments, following which the prosecutors opened an investigation and charged Molko with contempt of the institutions. In Italy, defamation is a serious offence, and when directed towards the government, parliament, courts or army, it could carry a fine of up to 5,000 euros, which is approximately $5,220, and a direct summons to trial, whereas public defamation could carry a prison term of up to 3 years. However, as per a spokesperson for Justice Minister Carlo Nordio, a prison sentence is unlikely for Molko. This has also reignited the debate about freedom of speech. In 2023, journalist Roberto Saviano was found guilty of defamation and fined just over $1,000 for using an expletive for Meloni in response to her hardline immigration policies. In July 2024, an Italian judge ordered another journalist to pay Meloni 5,000 euros for mocking her height on social media, ruling that it amounted to body shaming. Taking to X, she criticized the government for cracking down on freedom of expression and journalistic dissent, likening Italy to Prime Minister Viktor Orban's Hungary. In another case, Meloni previously sued a historian who allegedly called her a neo-Nazi in Seoul. However, the lawsuit was later dropped. Now, remember, a full month has passed since U.S. President Donald Trump returned to the White House, and the Trump administration has, in a way, wasted no time in making major decisions, both on global and domestic fronts. From Canada and Mexico to China and West Asia, Trump has left his mark, but perhaps the most consequential moves have come as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned. What's really going on behind the scenes at this point? Overall, the answer and the message is clear. Donald Trump seems to have granted the Russian President Vladimir Putin's wish list, most of which, by the way, were Russia's original demands even before the war broke out, effectively shutting down any opposition to Moscow and pushing the Kremlin to agree for a peace deal. So what exactly did Putin want? Let's just break it down for you. Condition number 1, no NATO membership for Ukraine. Now, last week, U.S. Secretary of Defense made it clear that Ukraine will not join NATO. He dismissed the idea, in fact, outright, calling it, quote-unquote, unrealistic. His statement put an end to any little hope Kiev had of securing NATO membership. Even the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, seems to have accepted this reality. suggesting a plan B for his country's defense in an interview with The Economist. US position, in a way, is clear. NATO membership for Ukraine is off the table, and any settlement to the war will reflect that reality. And this, by the way, aligns perfectly with Putin's demand that Ukraine remain outside of NATO. Condition number 2, no territorial concessions from Russia. Until recently, Zelensky had hoped to negotiate a land swap, basically offering small portions of Russian-held territory in Kursk in exchange for Ukraine regaining regions that it lost in the war. Around 20% of Ukraine, remember, remains under Russian control. But that idea was quickly quelled by the Kremlin. And the US Defense Secretary reinforced this stance, making it clear that Ukraine will never return to its pre-2014 borders. What's condition number 3? Europe must defend itself. In the past 1 week, Trump and the Defense Secretary have made their position on Europe's security crystal clear. Defending Europe is no longer America's burden. For nearly 8 decades, Western Europe has relied on the US military to maintain security. But, you see, Donald Trump seems to be on the path towards pulling the plug on that very arrangement. And the US Defense Secretary bluntly stated that European nations need to take primary responsibility for their own defense, reminding leaders that even US President Eisenhower warned about Europe freeloading of America. And Trump will not allow the US to be, in his words, become Uncle Sucker, quote unquote. Instead, the US Defense Secretary called on the European allies to step up, donate more ammunition and military equipment, expand their defense industries and prepare their citizens for the real threats that they face. And America made it clear that it will no longer be Europe's security blanket. Importantly, the US has also stated that Europe will not participate in negotiations in the Russia-Ukraine deal. Condition number 4. US troop withdrawal from the Baltics. Putin has long wanted NATO forces removed from the former Soviet territories. And it looks like he may be getting his way. According to reports, European officials believe that Donald Trump is likely to withdraw US troops from the Baltic states, a move that would basically expose NATO's eastern flank to Russian aggression. If Trump indeed decides to step back from European security, Putin's dream of a weaker NATO may be fast becoming reality. Condition number 5 is undermining Zelensky's legitimacy. Zelensky's presidential term expired in May 2024. However, because Ukraine has been under martial law since Russia's 2022 invasion, elections have been indefinitely postponed. The Kremlin, in fact, has seized on this to argue that Zelensky is no longer the legitimate leader of Ukraine. Putin has repeatedly labeled Zelensky illegitimate, reinforcing this claim in an interview last month. And Trump is also echoing that narrative. In fact, Trump has now called Zelensky, quote-unquote, a dictator without elections, and warned that he must act quickly to secure a peace deal because, in Trump's words, he's not going to have a country left. Trump's policies seem to have given Putin everything he wanted. Ukraine outside of NATO, no territorial concessions from Russia, Europe left to fend for itself, US troops potentially retreating from the Baltics, and Zelensky's legitimacy questioned. Perhaps even Putin himself could not have scripted this any better.